morning, everyone.
Morning.
Online and here in the room. It's good to be with you guys. We are going to discuss the Torah portion this morning. This is Kingdom Living's Torah study class that meets before our service. So welcome if you're joining us online. It's good to be here around familiar faces and friends. So, as always, I'd like to just start with a little prayer. Oh, by the way, my name is Dylan Carter. I'm a member here at Kingdom Living. So, let's open with some prayer and then we'll dig into the Torah portion. Should be a lot of fun. Lord, we thank you for Shabbat. We thank you for the first day of Elul, a season to reflect and to just journal and open our hearts before you, our minds before you. Yeshua, we come before you. You are the King. You are our Mashiach. And we welcome your inspiration. We welcome your strength and your clarity this morning. We ask you to lead and guide and inspire this dialogue and conversation around Parashat Re'eh to see. So help us, Lord. We can't do anything meaningful outside of our bond and attachment with you. So help us and keep us on the right track. In the name of Yeshua. Amen. All right. So, as always, I like to contextualize what we're talking about. So, to me, it's important to probably just kind of go back and consider the setting for what's happening here. So, we are going to be discussing Deuteronomy 11:26 all the way. This Torah portion's fairly long, all the way to chapter 16, verse 17. So we're going to start at the top, Deuteronomy 11:26, but we're right in the middle of the action. So Deuteronomy that gets its title from the Septuagint, and it means what? Anybody?
It means Deuteronomy means the second law.
Second law, right? In Hebrew, this book is known as Devarim, and what does that mean? Words, right? Mm-hmm. So we've got a series of speeches or sermons from Moses to the people before they enter the land. And so we've got a lot of words. And this is some long speeches, and you'll see some common threads and some themes. And so I just wanted to talk for just a second about the power of a speech. Right? Cultures, nations, honestly have hinged, and history has hinged on powerful speeches. Can you think of a few, even in our own modern history? Just want to shout out a couple powerful speeches that swayed our country, swayed culture, swayed laws, honestly. Let's just think of a few speeches.
Winston Churchill's Iron Curtain speech.
Right? And I mean, these speeches have moments, right? And we're on the steps of Moab, and this people, this ragtag bunch of people, is hearing from Moses, their trusted leader at this point, right? And he is summoning them. He's calling them to allegiance. He's calling them to faithfulness to the covenant. He's reminding them of their story and their history. What's another speech that kind of has that effect for the American people?
Martin Luther King.
Yes. The I Have a Dream speech, right? I mean, just go back and listen to that 17-minute speech and its power. It's absolute power to envision a people he addresses and uses Moses' language, right? Around the promised land and calling us into being one people, and so powerful. Quick little aside on that exact speech that I listened to a podcast. Anybody like podcasts? I listened to a podcast the last year or so, and this guy was talking about Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. And so many people just assume that the speech he gave was the speech he intended to give from the very beginning of that actual speech. But that's actually not the case. Maybe you've heard this, but when he was speaking, he was famous for his preparation for his sermons. He would spend hours upon hours. He'd spend all week rehearsing it. Almost by the time a Sunday morning came, Dr. Martin Luther King basically had his sermons memorized. So he had given a sermon weeks before about the section, those last 5 minutes where he goes into I have a dream, right? But that was not a part of his original speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. That was not even a part of it. And you can hear, if you listen closely, one of the ladies in the background, when he gets to about 5 minutes before he ends, when he goes into the I have a dream, one of the ladies starts saying, Martin, tell him about the dream. Tell him about the dream. And he spontaneously goes into that section of that famous speech that was not even a part of his original intention to share. And that's the part we all kind of remember, right? And so there's this act of spontaneity, but obviously based in a lot of discipline and a lot of study that Dr. King had done. But any other speeches? Yeah.
7 years ago.
Yes, right? That incredibly short speech. Go back and look at that, right? Go back and look at that speech. And history tells us that his voice wasn't that good, right? That wasn't even somebody had given this long speech before, I forget the name of the person.
He was a master orator. And he was the star attraction, I think.
Right, and so but he had given a really, really short speech that just swayed, which says a lot, right? Brevity, as Shakespeare said, is the soul of wit, and there's a lot that could be said. I mean, maybe we as teachers and preachers can take heed, and they're dense, but just gorgeous, and we study it in schools. Anybody else want to offer another powerful speech that impacted people?
Churchill had another, we shall fight on the beaches.
Yeah. And you think about the morale of the people, right?
Yeah.
In these speeches, you think about the morale of the people. So let's talk about the morale of the Jewish people, some assumptions we can make based on what Moses is sharing, but also based in what we know about his goals here. So, you have a large group of people. I don't know the exact setting for this, right? But you have a large group of people, and he's sharing and speaking out to them pre-microphones, obviously. So how this actually transpired is curious to me. But he did share, and he is calling these people into a place of identity, right? He's informing them of God's and reminding them of their history. But here's what's really kind of interesting, right? You have 40 years here have transpired, and now they're on the steps of Moab. They're about to enter the promised land. And you've got Joshua and Caleb, and then you have a lot of people that he's telling them about experiences that they had that some of these young ones don't remember, right? Some of the young ones they don't remember the actual deliverance out of Egypt, right? So you have the whole section in Deuteronomy 6 where he's saying, hey, you guys remember, or teach your children, right? So I want to pose this little thought here to you. This is notoriously difficult, right? But how do you as an adult transfer your understanding about God and his ways to your children, right? Because the common understanding is that most people don't believe you learn anything outside of what? Experience. Your own immediate trial and error experience, right? So that's what I'm a public school teacher, and most of my students would say, like, yeah, I've got to experience it. Most of them would say that, right? So he's trying to pass on in the retelling of history and the commissioning of the fathers to teach their sons and daughters on the way as they're traveling. He's trying to teach them to teach their children and talk about this and actually pass on some of their historical communal experience, which is really powerful and like kind of like can't be done without the Ruach, and kind of can't be done without some of these first words here that we want to get into. So last thing I want to talk about before we get into the actual just reading and talking is the power of words, right? And I just want to pose a question to you guys to think about and we can talk about. But how does a word get its meaning? How does a word in any particular language get its meaning? So let's think of really important words. What are some really important words? Shout them out. Love, right? Now, let's take that word in English, okay, and then we've got it in Greek, right? Agape, and then like Philadelphia, like brotherly love, right? So you've got this word love in English that has really come to mean something that you may or may not agree with, right? So words have history. Words have history, and words are defined through the experience of a people of that language, right? So when you think about what's another word that's important to us, say like faith, right? Now, how did that word come to mean what it means now? So like say in Hebrew, emunah, right? In Greek, pistis, right? So that word has all kinds of meaning, but how do we know what that word means?
We have like shared agreement about what it means.
We have shared agreement, right? But where are we deriving that information about what that word has come to mean? Because the word has an etymology, as we would say. It has a history, okay? And it's come through history, and it's kind of been molded and crafted by the experience of that people that carry that word. So the Jewish people carry some really massive words, right? And we, as English-speaking people, have to dig into that history to understand those words. So we don't know faith outside of this, what that word even means, outside of like the Bible, right? We don't know what that word really, really means outside of the history of the people. So I want to talk about a certain word that we're going to read about here in this first verse. So let's all look at if you can, look at your Bibles. We're going to start reading Parashat Re'eh, and that Re'eh is the actual first word you'll see there. This Torah portion takes its name after that word see. The word see, not S-E-A, obviously, S-E-E, see. I am setting before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing, if you listen to the mitzvot of Adonai your God that I am commanding you today. But the curse, if you do not listen to the mitzvot of Adonai your God, but turn from the way I am commanding you today to go after other gods you have not known. Okay, so we read 26, 27, 28. I am setting before you today a blessing and a curse. Who's setting before them today a blessing and a curse? Yeah? And it really seems like Moses is a big part of that too, right? So I am setting before you a blessing and a curse. So this, people have always had what? From the very beginning in the garden. People have always had what?
Choice.
choice in the matter, right? Power of choice. There's an argument going on in our culture, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, is that no one has free will. You should familiarize yourself with it because it's really entrenching itself, especially in the young, that really we're all just kind of either living in a simulation or we're puppets of the environment that we live in, and that nobody really has free choice. It's just a trick of society, and the word society used by my students is just AKA, it's synonymous with the devil. When kids say society, they're basically saying the devil. Actually, when they say two things, when they say social media, they're talking about the devil. When they're talking about society, they're talking about the devil, okay? And I'm like, well, hey, guys, like, who is society? And they're all like, I don't know. Like, who are we talking about? Right? Society is made up of a bunch of individuals, right?
Everybody but me.
Everybody except for me, right? So the power of choice, obviously, that grows. You know, like my youngest is 12, turning 13, and the power of his own choice is he's growing in responsibility, and he's growing in the ability to choose, right? And that's it's always connected to your responsibility, right? Yeah.
What do they see as the advantage to believing that?
Well, I think the advantage, and so I would personally say that the advantage of believing that you don't have free will is that you don't really have to take responsibility for your own choices because it's kind of dictated for you, right? And so if that's the case, if we are really just puppets for the culture and environment that we live in, we also it's just this powerlessness. It's really scary. And no wonder there's great apathy and anxiety and depression on a group of people that feel like they don't have any choice.
And my kids, 17, 18, why bother?
Yeah. So there's
it's the opposite. Oh, I don't have to take responsibility, but then you have the other kids, like you said, the depression and anxiety. Why should I even bother? Nothing's going to work anyway.
Yeah. So this is important. This is important that to honor the Hebraic worldview, right, that we come from. We believe God gives us choice. Now, Moses says, and God says, I'm setting it before you today, just like he did with Adam and Eve. I'm putting before you two trees in the garden. Choose life. And here he says again, I'm setting before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing, if you what? What's the word there? Listen to the mitzvot of Adonai your God that I'm commanding you today. But the curse, if you do not what? Listen to the mitzvot of Adonai your God, but turn from the way I'm commanding you today to go after other gods that you have not known. So let's talk about, in context, that word listen clearly does not mean the following. I heard you. I heard you. And how do we know that it doesn't mean, I heard you? How do we know, just by the context of those three verses, that listen is a weightier word than just I heard what you said? It means something different there. We, in this context, know this word well, right? This word is what? Shema, right? And it has this dual meaning, right? Two sides to this coin. It does mean hear, but it also means right? It also means I'm going to take in your words and I'm going to respond with my will because I am in a love. This is love, right? Shema is love. If somebody says, man, I love you, but they don't ever respond to you and they don't ever honor your request, that is not love, right? That's some kind of weird thing about feeling maybe in the moment, but that is not love, okay? So if you do not listen to the mitzvot of Adonai your God, but turn away from the way I'm commanding you today to go after other gods you have not known. So that word, Shema, obviously is a weighty word, and we know its definition all the way back into Deuteronomy like 5 and 6, right? And it's become like this core chant of the Jewish people, even today. Shema, Shema, right? And so many of us pray this before we go to bed. When our kids like do their bar and bat ceremonies, we ask them to do the Shema, to memorize and recite the Shema before us, right? So I'm setting before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing if you Shema. Okay, so let's go on to verse 29. Now when Adonai your God brings you into the land you're going in to possess, you are to set the blessing, the words, on Mount Gerizim and the curse on Mount Ebal. So for those of you that have already read like Deuteronomy 27 and 28, you get more of a picture of what he's talking about there. Are they not across the Jordan toward the west in the land of the Canaanites who dwell in the Arabah, opposite Gilgal, beside the oaks of Moreh? For you are about to cross over the Jordan to go in and possess the land Adonai your God has given you. You will possess it and dwell in it. You will take care to do all the statutes and ordinances that I'm setting before you today. So again, this is a speech. This is a speech. This is Moses rallying his people. He's telling them, you are going, you've known this for 40 years, but you are going to enter into this land. Okay. So, can we talk about dreams for a second? I don't mean dreams in the night. I mean dreams, the dreams you had as a child. The dreams, do you feel like the dreams, just a show of hands if you agree with me, do you feel like the dreams you had as a child are connected to the destiny that God has on you as an adult?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Anybody? Raise your hand if you do. Okay. Or maybe we just need to think about that, right? So he said, hey, you're a people of, I've promised you this land and you're about to enter into it. It's been like a real journey to get here, right? And he talks back about Mount Ebal and he talks about Mount Gerizim. If you know about Mount Gerizim, that's where, if you think about John chapter 4, that's where the Samaritans ended up calling the mountain of God. We worship on this mountain. Jewish people worship in Jerusalem. You know, Yeshua said, you know, salvation comes from the Jews. It's not really about mountains. It's about worshiping in spirit and in truth. But also Mount Ebal is also the place where it was Abraham's first stop in Canaan. It was also where God spoke to him and told him he was going to give him the land. So Joseph's bones are buried on Mount Ebal, and actually Jacob bought land right around there as well. So these are important historical places for the Jewish people. Okay, let's look into, so let's be thinking about promise, about promised land, about listening, about Shema. That's what we talked about so far. Let's look at chapter 12. Now chapter 12 starts a whole, chapter 12 all the way to chapter 26 is all the kind of like laws and commandments that Moses is going to instruct the people, okay, as they come into the land. These are the statutes and ordinances that you are to make sure to do in the land that Adonai, the God of your fathers, has given you to possess all the days that you live on the earth. Okay? And then verse 2, you must utterly destroy all the places where the nations that you will dispossess served their gods, on the high mountains and on the hills and under every green tree. You were to tear down their altars, smash their pillars, burn their Asherah poles in the fire, cut down the carved images of their gods, and you are to obliterate their name from that place. Let's keep reading. You are not to act like this toward Adonai your God. Rather, you are to seek only the place Adonai your God chooses from all your tribes to put his name to dwell. There you will come. There you are to bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes, the offering of your hand, your vow freewill offerings, the firstborn of your herd and of your flock. There you and your households will eat before Adonai your God and rejoice in every undertaking of your hand as Adonai your God has blessed you. You will not do all the things as we are doing here today, everyone doing what is right in his own eyes. For you have not yet come to the resting place and the inheritance that Adonai your God is giving you. But when you cross over the Jordan and settle in the land that Adonai your God enables you to inherit, and he gives you rest from all your enemies around you, you will dwell in safety. Let's keep going. One more paragraph. Then the place Adonai your God chooses to make his name dwell, there you are to bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes, the offering of your hand, all your finest vow offerings that you vow to Adonai. Then you will rejoice before Adonai your God, you and your sons and your daughters, your slaves and maids, and the Levite in your towns. There is no portion or inheritance among you. Be careful that you do not offer your burnt offerings in any place you see. Rather, do so only in the place Adonai chooses in one of your tribes. There you are to offer your burnt offerings, and there you are to do all I am commanding you. Now, we just read a long section, 12 to 14, 12, 1 through 14. And this whole section is about worship and where they are supposed to worship. Now, prior to this, there wasn't really direct instruction about this. They could worship and set up altars in different places. You see Abraham worshiping it, not in Jerusalem. There's just different places where people have worship. But here's the specific mitzvot that you are supposed to worship, not just anywhere, and you're also supposed to worship in a certain way, right? So, this week, as it's the second week of me teaching school, I read my students a graduation speech by a philosopher named David Foster Wallace. And in this speech, he makes this really great case that honestly, there's no such thing as an atheist. Because everybody worships something. Everybody worships something. And so this is a worship. The word worship, we talked about this. I talked about this with my students. I was like, that's a religious term, right? What does that mean? So we have this discussion about what does it mean to worship something? And am I worshiping something? And is it important for me to actually realize what I worship? Do I worship what I claim that I actually worship? How do I even gauge whether I worship what I say I worship? Okay? How do you gauge? So let's look at this passage again in that light. He's saying bring what? Bring your offerings. He's talking about the tithe. He's talking about your money. He's talking about your time, because you have to travel somewhere to worship, right? He's talking about all kinds of things. So, as believers, I was reading one of my students' writings, and she was just like, I worship Jesus Christ. And I was thinking about what I know about her already. And I was thinking about kind of some of the fruit that I've kind of noticed in her life. And I was like, do you? Really? I know that's really harsh, right? That's really harsh. But we are supposed to look at people like the fruit of people's lives, right? Are you what you say you are? But it's comforting to say you worship Jesus, right? For us that are believers. It's a comforting thing. It's like, yes, for sure, I worship Jesus. I worship the Lord. But what? How do you know that you worship the Lord? How do we know that we worship the Lord? So let's go back really quick. Is it just singing songs? Let's go to Genesis 4 real quick. Oh, Lori's going, I know what you're about to talk about. Genesis 4 real quick, because we're talking about worship. We're going to spend some time talking about this. We're going to flesh this out. So I was like, okay, I want you to be brutally honest. And these are kids that are a little more honest. In some ways, I would claim that they are honest in a way that sometimes believers are afraid to be honest. So I asked them to write to me, what do you worship? And man, some uncomfortable subjects came up, okay? Because I'm like, what are you looking at all day? What are you spending your time on? What are you spending your money on? What are you gazing at? When you are opening your phone like 150 times to snap a photograph of your own face, what do you worship? Okay? And so we had some honest, and I felt it was so cool though. It was so cool. Some of the boys were like, I'm not kidding. Some of the boys were like, Mr. Carter, do you mind if I write this but you not look at it? I was like, I will give you my word. Just at the top, right? Do not read. And I'll just scan it that you did it, but I won't even read. And you want to know why? Because they're like wanting to be honest about what they actually worship. Because when you think about it in the sacrifice of your time, when you think about it as in the sacrifice of your what your gaze and your attention is gripped by, it's kind of easy to be honest about what you actually worship. Right? Because it hits your pocketbook. It hits your cell. Look at your screen time, bruh. Okay, come on now. Like, what are you know, this is not that hard to figure out.
Yeah.
But in the realm of Christendom, sometimes it's hard to be honest. Which is sad. Stan.
You were talking about the girl that said she worships Jesus Christ, and you're thinking, well, judging by your actions, that may or may not be true. I think it's fairly common, particularly for somebody at that age, to say what they think they should say and then just hope they'll catch up to that eventually.
Yeah, that's good. And I love that. And that's important, right? Important bit of compassion. Stan's more compassionate than I am.
I think that's what Christians do.
Say that louder.
I think that's what Christians do sometimes when we say what we hope to be.
Yeah.
Or, that we'll catch up, and maybe that's why we say not completely honest.
So in the month of Elul that is established for examining yourself, and in Paul's language, examine yourselves to see whether you're in the faith. Like in the midst of there's ways of looking at this, right? There's ways of looking at this, and one way to look at it is to I've got a harsh overlord looking over my shoulder saying, "You don't worship me. You don't worship me." There's ways of looking at it. The other way of looking at this is that believers can be the most honest people on the planet.
Oh, that's good.
Because they have a loving, adoring Father that wants the honest worship, that wants real worship. He doesn't want the I love you, Lord, and you're thinking about your argument you have with your wife, and you're thinking about, I love, it's rah, 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 and we're but the prophets, oh my goodness, go back and read Isaiah, right? They honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And the place of worship is for the humble, the contrite of heart, the broken of heart, right? And so I'm going too far. I wanted to end up here, not talk about this right now. Let's look at Genesis 4, because here's one of the more confusing passages about worship, right? This one's a dilemma, and we are given, again, gave birth to Cain. Oh, Cain, she said, I produced a man with Adonai. Then she gave birth again to his brother Abel. Some people say they were twins. Some people say. Abel became a shepherd of flocks, while Cain became a worker of the ground. So it happened, after some time, that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to Adonai, while Abel, he also brought of the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions. Now Adonai looked favorably upon Abel and his offering, but upon Cain and his offering he did not look favorably. Pause. Okay, so within us, human beings, from the very beginning, we are worshipers. Right? We're worshipers. Everybody's a worshiper. Everybody. That's what this philosopher is making a phenomenal case for. The speech is called This Is Water. Again, it's not written by a believer, but if you're interested, you should read it. It's phenomenal. It's talking all about how we're hardwired as self-centered people, and we have to find a way of breaking out of self to see people, right? Which it's a powerful, powerful speech. Okay. So his claim that we're worshipers, scriptures back this up. As soon as Adam and Eve had children, they're coming off of a kind of traumatic experience, right? And they are now here they have a son, two sons. They have Cain and they have Abel. And Cain and Abel, as they age, want to bring their offering before the Lord, right? How do they know this? It's hardwired in them, right? And they still have a pretty immediate relationship with the Lord, as you will see. What I mean by, in some sense, is very close. Look how close God is to Abel. Let's look at 5b. Cain became very angry, and his countenance fell. Now remember, I'm making a case that believers can be the most honest people on the earth. We can be. Cain became very angry, and his countenance fell. Then Adonai said to Cain, look how close they are. Look how close God is to Cain.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just outside the garden. They're not that far away, right? Then Adonai said to Cain, why are you so angry? Why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, Cain, your countenance will lift. But if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the doorway. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. Oh, that's beautiful. He's got a poet.
Yeah.
He made you, right? He's a poet. Poema. Look at this beautiful language, this figurative language. Remember personification from 9th grade, folks? Sin is crouching at your doorway, my friend. Here's God reasoning with Cain, opening, just like Moses is reasoning with the people. I'm putting before you life. I'm putting before you death. Choose life, he's saying, right? And he's looking at Cain and he's saying, Cain, this thing called sin, it's crouching at your doorway. You have the power. Right? Remember how I talked about my students and many people in our culture don't believe we have free will anymore? You have the power. You have the power to master it. Right? Even in the Psalms, there's language. There's language in the Psalms. If you look at Psalm 18, there's language in the Psalms where the psalmist cries, I kept myself from my sin. It's not like, at certain times, and I know you know this, we all know this, at certain times the best thing you can do to honor the Lord is just keep yourself from your sin.
Mm-hmm.
Kids need to know this. Young people need to know this. That's, you know what? And that may be everything the Lord's asking of you in that moment in your maturity level. All you can do is to you're not flourishing in righteousness. You're just keeping yourself from your sins.
Right.
At that point. And that honors the Lord. Right? That honors the Lord. And we need to honor that virtue of so at this point, he's just oh, I see what's coming. I know what's in your heart, Cain. You got to master this. You have an opportunity right now. This is the window for your life. Okay? Verse 8. Cain spoke to Abel, his brother. What was that combo like, eh? While they were in the field, Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and he killed him. Why don't you give us more details, Lord? Why can't we have a little more details? Are we supposed to read in between the lines? Are we supposed to engage our imagination in reading the scriptures? Then Adonai said to Cain, "Hey Cain, where's your brother?" Now, the rabbis say that that's kind of like the question that the rest of the Bible answers.
Right.
Right? Who's your brother? And what did Yeshua come answering? I mean, he came and he gave some really good instructions on who your brother is, right? So, and even like people you're just passing by are your neighbor, right? According to the story of the Good Samaritan. But back to worship, okay? So it says that Abel did what? What is basically, there's very little information, but Cain worshipped, Abel worshipped. God, let's look at it from a really simplistic. God wasn't pleased with Cain's worship. God was pleased with Abel's worship. Cain ended up digressing and falling into deeper sin after he discarded what the Lord's rebuke was to him, right? Instead of just coming out and being honest. So, what can we ascertain about what worship is and isn't just from this story? From this first story about worship? What are some things we can ascertain about what it is and isn't?
All about your heart posture.
It's all about your heart posture, right? That is good. And how do we know that? Because we say that a lot. And we say that in a way that kind of makes it about, I know Elena, so I know this is not what she means, but sometimes we say it's about the heart, and then we're like, so it doesn't really matter about this, and it doesn't really matter about how much time I'm spending here, and that doesn't matter. It's because it's about the heart. But it's about the heart. So clearly it does matter about all these things, that the fruit on the tree, right? Right? So, what else can we ascertain about worship from the Cain and Abel story?
Can I make a comment about that?
Yeah.
I'm quoting Mike Bickle, but I haven't heard this for a while, but he always said, where our heart is where we spend our time and our money.
Right.
A lot of times that's the expression of, when you kind of look at those couple areas, it will kind of show you, well, this is where your heart is, because this is kind of where, in our culture, that's like our resources. It's like our time and our money. That's what we kind of have to offer. So, just
That's good.
comment. Yeah.
That's really good.
It's about obedience, because you said if you do well, and that's assuming that he was instructed on what to do, because that's not written in there either.
Right?
But how could the Lord rebuke him if he hadn't already told him what well looks like?
Right.
So, to me, I have to believe that God had already, he had to have known what God was, what that means, what did that entail to do well.
Yeah.
And then we have to be willing, even though we know what to do well is, sometimes we don't always want to follow that, like if it means more money or more time or more effort to be kind or to be loving or whatever things God has us doing, we don't always want to do what we know is well to do.
That's good. That's really good. Anything else? What can we ascertain about the heart of worship from the Cain and Abel story? Yeah.
Well, it says that Abel brought first.
Yes, it did. There's other translations like the choicest, right? The best, like the first. He already had this heart to I'm just a steward. This is all yours. I want to give it back to you, right? Good. That's so good. Anything else? All right. So let's turn to Psalm 86. Psalm 86. We're talking about what do I worship. How do I know what I worship? How can I be honest about the Lord, about what I worship? Let's look at verse 10. For you are great and do wonders. You alone are God. Teach me your way, Adonai, that I may walk in your truth. Give me an undivided heart to fear your name. Okay? Give me an undivided heart to fear your name. This is a great, great prayer, okay, about a heart of worship. Other translations might say, give me singleness of heart. You know, Soren Kierkegaard, in one of his famous books, he titled it, Purity of Heart is to will one thing. Purity of heart is to will one thing, right? So, and the month of Elul, what's the psalm that traditionally is read every day?
27.
Psalm 27. And what's one of the more famous lines that we like to talk about around here and a lot of people like to talk about? What?
One thing.
This one thing, right? So let's turn to 2 Corinthians 3. Second Corinthians 3. Second Corinthians 3. So this is all about the new covenant and the amazing governing covenant, right? About walking inside the Holy of Holies. Let's look at verse 16 of chapter 3. 2 Corinthians 3:16. But whenever someone turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away.
Yes.
Now the Lord is the Spirit. And where the Ruach Adonai is, there's freedom, liberty. But we all, with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as from the Lord, who is the Spirit. Okay, I want to come back to that. But I do want to share with you a little experience I had yesterday. So, one of my responsibilities as a English teacher is to teach Greek mythology, okay? And we all know the story of Narcissus, right? We all know the story of Narcissus. So I read my students a brief version of the Narcissus story, and it was actually really powerful, okay? So we have this young, beautiful person, right? And he ends up, in case you're not familiar with the story, he ends up recognizing how beautiful he is. And all the little girls, just like, you know, that are attracted to him and in love with him, he could care less, right? Because he falls in love with his own image. And he tries to kiss his own image. He does. But it's elusive. He can never, find it. Because as he comes to it, it's coming to him. But the water moves right before he gets it, right? And he can never actually get what he thinks he really, really wants. And he pines away at the edge of the lake. And he eventually dies, right? Okay.
Should have had a mirror.
So, speaking of mirror, and so I asked my students this, and there was I'll be honest with you, I could feel the Lord when I was reading the story at one point. I mean, and I asked them, hey, you guys, is there any chance that your and our experience as a culture of the way we're using social media is kind of like us looking into and gazing at our own reflection in the pool of water. And they were like, they were kind of dumbfounded by it for a second. They were, wow, yeah, man, yeah, no, I don't know, maybe. And this one boy, this one young man, was so articulate, and he said to the class, he said, this was yesterday, he said, we have grown up staring at ourselves our entire lives and taking pictures of ourselves our entire lives. And he's like, we kind of, though we say we don't, we kind of love our own faces so much. And we're kind of like, just like giving ourselves into this transaction. And the whole class was like listening to him, and at the same time was like, his vulnerability was kind of striking. You could feel it. It brought in like a really great honesty, but also like, ooh, I don't know if I want to be as honest as blank about this, because that's really honest. But it was liberating at the same time, because people by nature are worshipers, and one of the things we mean by that is people are gazers. People need to look outward. The young man that told me, Mr. Carr, please don't read what I write about what I worship. It's because they're ashamed of what they're gazing at. They know it's wrong. And they feel a deep, good shame about it. They should. The ones I'm worried about are the ones that don't feel shame anymore about what they're gazing at. So we're gazing at things, and you know what? That transaction of that gaze, we know this. We know that transaction is transformative, for better or for worse. The transaction of what your heart is gazing at is transformative. And the scriptures obviously know this, and Paul's saying, you will be transformed as you, I know it's like a mirror, he says, and as like a modern mirror is not the same. A modern mirror is not the same as a first century mirror, right? A first century mirror was like warbly, and you're like, oh, is that me? Whoa, okay. It's kind of like the funny mirror at the circus, right? It's like, you're like, I kind of see it. Like, and this is what it's like for us as we're worshiping. I mean, we're still on this side, right? And when we gaze at the Lord, we're kind of seeing him, right? But we're kind of, I mean, what is it going to be like that day on the 8th day, right? When we stand before the Father. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Right? And what is it like for John in Revelation 1 and Revelation 4 when he actually sees the resurrected Yeshua? But Paul's beautiful claim to us, you guys, and this is where faith comes in. And we got to be honest about this. Paul's beautiful claim is that the Lord is the Ruach.
What?
The Lord is the Ruach.
Oh.
And where the Ruach is, there's liberty, there's freedom, there's this transaction of transformation. But how does this work? How does this work? Okay? Because Cain was kind of doing it, right? And the prophets are like, Israel, you're kind of doing it, but your heart's far from me. And so, where do we start? Maybe we start, and this is what I want to just throw out to you in the moment when you're having some time with the Lord. Maybe it starts with an honest journaling time, where you're asking yourself, what am I worshiping? What am I worshiping? Just me and you, Lord. Blessed are the broken and the contrite. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. We should be the most honest people because there's no secrets for him. So there's nothing he doesn't know about us already. So let's just be honest. As believers, let's just be honest. Where am I spending my time? Where's my attention or my gaze? Right? Little Eliana Simon, one of our Kefarim, she went up to her mom recently and she's like, Mom, I just can't focus during worship. And her mom looked at her and she says, Sweetie, focus is a muscle. Focus is a muscle. You gotta what can you give right now? Can you give 10 minutes right now?
Yeah.
Can you give 3 minutes right now? Focus is a muscle. So, I thought that was so helpful when it comes to worship. Let's not be too hard on ourselves, but let's be honest. Because, and so maybe one place to start in the month of Elul, okay, is gratitude as well, right?
Yeah.
So you go back and you look in this Torah portion. What is help me here. What is one of the main ways that Moses says, based on blank, let's give him our whole heart. And let's be grateful and let's obey. What is he always referring back to? As this call to allegiance based on blank. What is he always referring back to? Always. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of
Egypt.
Right?
Out of bondage.
Out of bondage. You are not slaves anymore. So my next challenge and thought to you guys is how often do you think about the fact that you were a slave?
A lot.
Yeah? That's awesome. That's awesome. Hey, are you supposed to think back to the original forgiveness of your sins? And I know some of you guys. I know some of you guys pretty well. And so knowing, I know you have grateful hearts. I know you know where you've come from and where you sit today, right? You're trophies to the Lord. Y'all are trophies to the Lord. The fact that you sit here early on a Saturday morning trying to glean from a guy like me, y'all are humble trophies to the Lord. You are a special group of people, and those of you watching online. So let's there's two places to start. And this is my challenge for the month of Elul. And I know I'm an English teacher, but don't just discard me because of that, okay? Think about, I want you to journal. Is there precedent for us writing our thoughts to the Lord? Is there a precedent for us doing this?
Yeah.
I'm not just being an English teacher. I mean, David set a great precedent for processing your feelings before the Lord, and the Jewish people really captured that, right? So let's get a good little journal for the month of Elul, and let's start it with what do I worship, and let's think back to how much he saved me from. Let me think about that for a moment. This ignorant little skateboarding kid lost in California, so lost, wrapped up in sexual brokenness already, wrapped up in just shame and rejection. There were times where I thought, how could I even know freedom in my mind? How can I even know freedom in my mind? And I enjoy an incredible amount of freedom in my mind. Not that there's not places for tightening it up. There is. But the fact that I can stand here before you guys and say that I have an incredible amount of freedom in my mind brings me so much joy. Could I have done that by myself? No way. Absolutely no way. There is absolutely no way. When I first came to Kansas City in 1994, I had so much shame and rejection on myself as a 19-year-old young man. I had difficulty looking people in the eyes without blushing uncontrollably. I haven't had an experience like that, and I don't even know how long. And it's the love of God and the love of God's people. God's people and friends, my friends, and older people saying, man, I see you. I see you. I see who you are. You know. So, we're talking about worship, all right? So let's, one more passage. Let's go to Psalm 50. Psalm 50. Psalm 50. Let's start at verse 7. And we're going to look at this beautiful, beautiful psalm. Hear, my people, and I will speak, O Israel, and I will testify against you. I am God, your God. I do not rebuke you for your sacrifices, for your burnt offerings are continually before me. Right? They have a form of worship. A form of worship. I have no need of a bull from your house, nor goats from your pens. This is God making a little joke. Like, right? I don't need your money. I don't need anything from you, actually. This is not about me. This is kind of about you. All right. For every beast of the forest is mine, friends, and the cattle on 1,000 hills. I love God's language. It's so beautiful. I know every bird of the mountains. Yeshua said something like that too, right? Everything moving in the field is mine. If I were hungry, I wouldn't even tell you. World is mine, everything it contains. Do I eat the flesh of bulls or drink the blood of goats? Offer me a sacrifice of thank offerings. Then fulfill your vows to Elyon. Call upon me when you're in trouble. And when I rescue you, Dylan, when I cleanse your mind and you stand before people 20 years later and say, God fixed me. God changed my mind. You'll be honoring me. But to the wicked, God says, what are you doing reciting my laws? Now, whoa. We're not talking about the nations here. Are the nations reciting God's laws?
No.
We're talking to the Jewish people. The Jewish people reciting God's laws, offering sacrifices. What are you guys doing reciting my laws and taking my covenant in your mouth? Almost like, you remember when Will Smith looked at it, he's like, get my wife's name out of your mouth. Remember when he said that? And then he went and slapped him. It was really gross. But God's like saying like, hey, why is my covenant in your mouth?
Yeah.
You hate discipline. You cast my words behind you. What is worship? Is worship discipline and service? Is worship what the people downstairs with the kids this morning? Is that worship? Right? When you see a thief, you're pleased with him. Your portion's with the adulterers. If you have unleashed your mouth for evil and harnessed your tongue for deceit, you sit, you talk against your brother, you slander your own mother's son, Cain. These things you have done. Should I be quiet? You thought I was just like you, but now I reprove you and set the case before your eyes. Now consider this, you who forget God, or else I will tear you in pieces with no one to rescue you. A sacrifice of praise honors me. And to the one who orders his way aright, I will show the salvation of God. Man, so what is worship? What does it mean to worship? A sacrifice of praise, thanksgiving, honors me. And to the guy and gal that orders their life correctly, they're going to know the Yeshua of God. They're going to know the salvation of God. Okay? I said that was my last one. I guess I didn't tell the truth. Go over to Matthew 7. This will be the last one. Moses is on the steps of Moab. He's calling his people this beautiful speech to allegiance to the covenant. And here Yeshua on the mountain. Look at verse 24. Verse 24, Yeshua says, Therefore, what's it there for? It's therefore because of everything that he's already said. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and just like hears him. He's good. All you need to do is hear him. Right? Remember how we talked about listen at the beginning? Does listen mean hearing? Everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house. And yet it did not fall, for its foundation had been built on the rock. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that guy's house. And it fell. And great was its fall. Now when Yeshua had finished these words, the crowds were astounded at his teaching. He was teaching them as one having authority, not like their Torah scholars. So worship is about ordering your way aright. Worship might be like spending a whole season, a couple years in the Sermon on the Mount. As a disciple, right? As a disciple. What does it mean to obey, worship Yeshua? Clearly it means like obeying his teachings. Just like what does it mean to honor me as a parent for my sons and my daughter? Does it mean just hearing what I say and not doing it? So, my request, and I'm going to do this with you guys. Let's have a time this week where we sit down and write about what do I worship? And then let's have a time of writing about where have I come from? How much has God already changed? Let's have a time of thanksgiving, of like, man, look at the life that he has built. Because I tell you what, like I would not be married to Tracy if it weren't for the Lord. I don't know if I'd be alive, to be honest. I wouldn't have the beautiful family you guys see that I have. God has like given me all these things.
Amen.
So let's have a season and a lule of reflection and thanksgiving.
Dylan, could you repeat those, please? The
Yeah.
questions you just said.
What do I worship? What do I really worship?
Got it.
And where have I come from? Where have I come from? So, Adonai, Elohim. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for these special people in this room that love you. These are ones that love you, Lord. Thank you for your gentleness that makes us great. Thank you for being gentle and forgiving and kind to us. Make us loud, proud witnessers of your great justice and righteousness in our lives. Make us voices of your great goodness and hesed love. May we be people that stare at the hesed love of God and order our way aright. May we be people full of thanksgiving and generosity with the things that you've given us. Blessed are those that give. Blessed are the generous. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the broken and the contrite. Blessed are those that are really honest with you. So Lord, may we be a people that don't just honor you with our lips. May we never be a people that just that live a rote life. May we be a people that dig deep and always live honest, open before you, because before you there are no secrets. And as Tom said a couple weeks back, our lives are hidden with you in God. So we thank you for this morning and just ask for your great blessing on us as a community, and I ask you to